Hello, welcome to the Hybrid Ministries Tech Forum. This is week 6, and we have about 50 new people registered in just the last week alone. Our community is growing, and with people from 6 different countries and from 3 different continents that I know of anyway. And our Discord is there for you with curated information and ideas on topics such as audio, music, production, copyrights, needs assessments, hearing assistance, financing, and so much more. The Discord for new people that are just joining us is our companion platform that is open all week long. And our panelists are monitoring it, answering questions, providing information, and generally being there to help you. We even helped one of our attendees find a qualified contractor in their rural area in New England. So we're having discussions and responding all week. So hop on to the Discord. There are topics and discussion topics there for all kinds of things relating to hybrid worship, virtual worship, copyrights, all kinds of things. And we're posting our agendas for the next few weeks as they get confirmed. And we really want to hear from you whether we're on the right track in providing you with valuable information. We know that there's a mix of technical and non-technical people there, and we want to be of value to everyone. So in addition to non-technical topics, such as needs assessment to start your project off, financing and copyrights, we know that there's a real need to cover the technical topics too, such as equipment selection and wiring, programming, and more. And we're more than ready to do that. For today, for example, we're going to look at the different kinds of cameras that you might find to use and some of the specs that you want to look for. And we're going to circle back around and take a detailed exploration of live sound mixing, consoles, microphones, and more, and a look at recording software, where you have the option of recording a live mix or each microphone separately, and then be able to go back and remix them later. And one of our panelists, J-Lo, I think has something that she wants to offer us.
Thank you, Marty. Mondays at 3 p.m., I've started like an Audacity live tutorial training session. I've already met with 2 folks, and I'd be glad to continue to meet at that same time. So if you're interested, just send me a PM. You can also reach me through the Facebook page, TechUU COVID Response, or on Discord. Either one, I'd love to have some more folks on the line, and we'll walk through Audacity. I will meet you where you're at. So if you're a total novice, I can handle that. If you've got more things to share, let's continue to share with each other and learn from each other. And Mark also has something to offer as well.
Yeah, the church I'm in, we use Soundtrap for our choir to do all of their remote recording. I'd be happy to walk someone through Soundtrap if you wish.
All right, beautiful. And at some point, I do want to offer a couple of sessions on the multi-track software Studio One, which is very popular and I've installed in a number of churches. And is very much like Pro Tools, but easier and can be configured to do a lot of different things for you, some of them automatically. So tell us what you want to talk about. What's most pressing for you in your transition from virtual service to hybrid service and even hybrid church life in general, because the online presence that you have established during virtual services is not something that you should be wanting to give up anytime soon. You have, most churches have reported seeing their audience, a congregation grow from beyond your home neighborhood. People from across the country who have moved away and were former members, people who are now international, are coming to visit services on Sunday. And you can grow your church as much as you would like to. You're no longer limited to the dimensions of your sanctuary. So tell us how we can help you. Now, and there's a channel in the Discord just for that very topic. Tell us what you want to know. All right, so there was a lot of stuff going on today, this week, with increased availability of COVID vaccinations, and some governors beginning to open businesses back up and such, and even houses of worship lifting or easing some of the capacity restrictions. So that's all very promising. And, you know, we want to help you to be ready when you're ready to go back in the sanctuary. Okay, so today on our panel, we're going to start with J-Lo. So J-Lo has earned her CTS, which is Certified Technology Specialist, after working in the AV integration space for over 4 years. She's also a virtual content creator, a choir director, a music minister, an audio engineer, and she collaborates with a number of churches on the East Coast. And why don't you introduce the rest of the panel to us?
Thank you. David O'Connor is from First Unitarian Church in Philadelphia, where he's the tech team coordinator, and he has a theater director background, but he currently works as an educator focused on self-directed education. And I need to pick your brain about that. Mark Plukas, wave Mark, from Franklin, Massachusetts, by day is the operations manager for an independent AV control systems programming company. Mark is also the technical director for Circle of Friends Coffee House at First Universalist Society in Franklin, and has been audio and tech support for his fellowship for years. Jay Paul from Ellicott City, Maryland. By day, Jay is the national key account manager for a leading manufacturer of pro audio solutions. During his long career in audio, he has been out on the road as front of the house sound engineer, as well as mixing live sound in some very well-known casinos in Atlantic City. Jay is an AV support volunteer for the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Columbia, as well as audio engineer for the UUCC's One World Coffee House. Crystal Vakes is our resident disruptor. Her myriad professional roles include writing, project management, consultancy, editing, systems administration, web development, and tech support. Currently, she's a technical consultant for the UU Church of Jacksonville, Florida, where she is assisting her congregation with transitioning to hybrid worship. Leo Mendel's joining us from London. He's the founding director of a digital sports agency called Sotic. They've been delivering websites and streaming around the world for over 20 years, including the first ever live top European soccer match in 2001. Leo also advises synagogues on how to set up for live streaming of services, and has produced over 70 live events in the last year for Jewish organizations around the world. And Marty, should I read your bio, or should you introduce yourself?
Oh, please go ahead. Thank you.
Marty Atias is from ATS Communications in Silver Spring, Maryland. He's been a media production and communications engineer for 45 years. His production experience ranges from broadcast radio and television to music recording and live performance to networking and telephone communications. He's a consultant, a systems design and integration engineer, a sound mixer, and a sound editor. And he's been a member of UUCSS for 11 years. If you would like more information on our bios, you can find them on the Discord channel called Panelists Bios.
All right, thank you very much. Well, then let's get into it. Today, our two topics are going to be cameras, and then later on, we're going to take a look at lighting. So cameras is a real interesting topic because there are so many different kinds of cameras out there. Everything from your phone to broadcast cameras, but most of us are going to be choosing a smaller type of camera that can be mounted on a tripod or on a wall or from a ceiling to capture various angles in your sanctuary. Now, to me, there are a few things that are less interesting to watch than a single locked down camera, such as this one, for an hour to an hour and a half. You know, if you pay attention to any television show, any movie, you'll notice that the camera angle changes very often, sometimes as often as just every few seconds. And that is because staring at one thing is just not normally what we do. We're always diverting our eyes, we're looking around, and as people are engaging in conversation, you're changing from one to the other. And it's just the way we operate as humans, and it's the way we perceive the world. And it keeps our minds interested, and it keeps us engaged. So having multiple cameras mounted in different places around the sanctuary gives us options for looking at things in different ways, for taking close-ups or wide shots or an angle, a side angle or head-on angle, and also helps to heighten the drama and the mood by looking at things in from different angles. So I have a presentation just to show what some of the different kinds of cameras are. And let me see if I can get this working here. Oh, why is that? Okay, hang on just a second for me. Here we go. Okay. So I got to get back to the beginning. All right, so cameras. So there are a number of different kinds of cameras that we'll find. A very popular type of camera is the PTZ camera or pan tilt zoom. And we have upper left here, we have two different kinds of pan tilt zoom cameras. And they can get kind of pricey because there's a lot that goes on in these things. Not only is it a camera, but it's a zoom camera that, you know, you can zoom in and out, and it has motors in it to do panning and tilting all around. So you can get many, many different perspectives on your room by using a single pan tilt camera. They come with different zoom ratios. So you'll see them with a 10 times zoom, a 20 or a 30 times zoom. And the higher the zoom number, the closer you can zoom in. And to look at that in a different way, it's the field of view, or how wide the viewing image will be. So for a 10 times zoom, when you zoom in all the way and you are 30 feet from your stage, your viewing angle might be 20 feet wide. So you're seeing 20 feet across your chancel or stage. With a 20 times zoom, that may get down to 10 feet. With a 30-foot zoom, a 30 times zoom, that may get down to anywhere from 3 to 5 feet. Now, what that does is it means that you're zooming in closer to somebody, and they are filling up the frame of the screen. rather than seeing all of the background. And if you want to see the background, you can zoom out. Now, that also means that with a higher zoom ratio, you can put that camera farther away in the back of the room. If you have a sanctuary that is 60 to 80 feet deep, you use a higher zoom lens so that you can still zoom in fairly tight so you can see the features of somebody's face, the details of their clothing, and and that makes for, when you want to really zoom in, you can do that. Now,
Marty, may I interrupt you for a quick second?
absolutely,
We
yes.
forgot to point out on Discord that there's a new place for questions now. The channel is called Live Questions. It's kind of right there up top. Live questions. Please put your questions in that box and we will get to them at the Q&A portion of the show.
Thank you very much. JLo is our Q&A moderator. And yes, that's right. Different from the last couple of weeks, I've taken the questions for the panel out of the general category and created a new category just for it, and it's called Live Questions. And then if you have a comment that's not meant to be a question, like a chat, for instance, there's another channel there for live chatting. Now, for today, I also put in a third category, a third channel there, asking you what size church are you? What's the size of your sanctuary in terms of seating capacity? What's your membership like? Just so that we can get an idea of the range of viewers that we have that we're trying to serve to you, so that that'll help us kind of tailor our content a little bit better for you. So thank you, JLo, for that. Now, so we have three different kinds of pan-tilt zoom cameras, and there are way more than that, but I chose three typical ones. And the one at the bottom is a little bit special because this is a really tiny little one that you can use for special shots. So if you want to put a little pan-tilt zoom camera like on your chancel somewhere as a foot microphone, or maybe if you have a large lectern or pulpit, you can put one on there, and with the pan-tilt zoom means that you can kind of move it when people move around, or if you have one person there, you can zoom in a little bit. If you have two people there, you can zoom out a little bit. And gives you a nice close-up perspective that you wouldn't get any other way. Over on the right side, we have two kinds of fixed cameras. The one on the bottom right is a typical box camera, is what we call it. And they can have a fixed lens or a zoom lens like this one does. And this one has a 30 times zoom lens. And you'll notice that the pricing here, $1,500, is a lot less than the $2,400 for the pan-tilt zoom camera because it doesn't have the motors. It's just a fixed camera. And you can mount this on a wall or on the back wall just to get a center head-on shot of the chancel and the pulpit for sermons. So that's your basic head-on shot. You can also put it on an arm or a tripod that gives you a way to move it around if you wanted to. We'll get to that later. The one in the upper right is a miniature fixed lens camera. And this is really small. It's less than 2 inches all the way around, 2 inches cubed. So it's real easy to hide. And it's got an HDMI output or an SDI output. So it's real easy to wire to. And these can be put on a mic stand on stage. You can use these for musicians, for close-ups. You can use them on the pulpit. They have a variety of applications. So that one and the little mini pan-tilt zoom are really good for that. And then we'll get into other types of fixed cameras, DSLR cameras, for instance. So they look like your typical still camera, but these cameras have HDMI outputs, so they're actually usable as video cameras. And they're really good to put on tripods. What you don't get with these is, in many cases, although there may be some exceptions to this, you don't get control over focus and zoom and iris with these because they are not motorized that way. And they come in a range of prices, and you'll notice that, they may be more or less than the pan-tilt zoom cameras or even some of the fixed cameras. This one here on the left, the Blackmagic Micro, is a fabulous camera, especially if you're using the ATEM Mini switchers, hardware switchers, because those switchers can access the controls in this camera directly, and you have control over many, many different features, and the way that this camera looks and operates, you can control that right from the switcher, which is a real big convenience. The one in the middle is also a Blackmagic camera. It's the 4K camera. So this is a much higher resolution camera, and also accessible and controllable from the ATEM switcher. But on the right, you can see this is just a Canon standard DSLR with an HDMI output that works great as well. Now, I want to talk about some of the other differences between these cameras. And we're going to go back here. Some of the things that I've listed here are the number of megapixels and the resolution. So 2.14 megapixels, 1080p. 1080p is standard high definition, which you're going to find in pretty much all of these. This one is 2.13 megapixels, is pretty much the same. The little mini bullet has 5 megapixels, which is more than double the other cameras, which is very interesting. The two fixed cameras here have a 2.5 megapixels and 2.5 megapixels as well. So the pan-tilt zoom cameras I've also listed with a sensor size. And I want to get into that because that's really important differentiation between different cameras. This has a 1/2.8 inch, or what we call a 2.8 inch sensor. Now, and I will explain that in a moment. This is 2.5, this is 2.5. All of these are 2.8s. The DSLRs, this is a 4/3, this is a 4/3, and this is what's called an APS-C sensor. So what does all of that mean? So in place of emulsion film, there's an electronic panel that collects the light information and creates and converts that into electrical images that create the image. And there are different size sensors. Now, each one of these sensors has a whole matrix of very, very, very tiny, what we refer to as pixels, but they're actually called light sites, but we refer to them as pixels. So when you say 2.5 million pixels, then there will be 2.5 million little squares throughout the sensor that make up the image. Now, the pan-tilt zoom cameras, so the full frame sensor that's right here is the size, the same physical size as a 35 millimeter frame of a picture frame. So a piece of motion picture film or a still frame picture film that is a 35 millimeter frame would be the same size as a full frame. And all of these others are kind of referencing that size, 36 by 24 millimeters. A 2.8 is 1/2.8, or just a little smaller than 1/2 of a full frame, is what the pan-tilt zoom cameras had. The 1/2.5 is a little bit larger than that, and that would have referred to the fixed cameras. right here. The 4/3 cameras from the DSLRs feature a quite a bit larger sensor. Now, so what's the practical difference there? Well, a smaller sensor has a smaller field of view. And what that means is, so next time you're watching a movie, right? Try to pay attention to what you see on the screen and what is in focus and what is out of focus. A narrow field of view means that you can have your subject, the person that is speaking on camera, be completely in focus, and then everything else around them be out of focus. And that's done for dramatic effect, and it's done to draw your eye to where the cinematographer or the photographer wants you to pay attention. And everything else is just context. A larger deep field of view, or a deep field of view, which would be like your cell phone camera, where everything is in focus regardless of distance, everything is in focus at the same time. Now, which one you want is a matter of your personal application and your taste, and you're free to use any one. But there will be times when you'll want to draw your viewer's eye to a certain place on the screen, because that's where they should be paying attention, and everything else is beauty and is context, but not real important to the scene. So smaller sensors will have a smaller field of view. Smaller sensors also gather less light, so they need more light in order to provide a good image. With dimmer lighting, the picture could become noisy. You'll see little grains like moving around in the picture on solids or darks. The darks will lose detail. And so a larger sensor will gather more light and allow you to operate in darker environments. Now think Christmas time. The lights go down and you're doing a candlelit scene, right? Or the Christmas tree, where the room is really dark, but you still want to be able to see people. You want to be able to see detail. You want it to be really looking really beautiful and clean. So a larger sensor will enable you to do that. So wider depth of field, smaller field of view means that the picture frame will be smaller with a smaller sensor. So with a full frame sensor at any particular, well, let's use a fixed focal length lens, let's just say a 50mm lens. Your field of view at 20 feet may be 20 feet wide with a full frame sensor, 35mm sensor. With a much smaller sensor, you won't see that 20 feet. You'll only see maybe 6 feet from edge to edge of the frame, which means you need a wider lens to see the full frame. It's just a difference, but it's something to be aware of. And smaller sensors will have less detail and they will have more noise. So the sensor size is an important spec that we pay attention to. And, if you're looking at pan tilt zoom cameras, pretty much all of them have the same sensor size. But you should be aware that if you want the benefits of a larger sensor, you have other options in different types of cameras. Now, if you choose one of these other fixed cameras, but you still want the ability to move it around using a controller, right? Instead of having somebody man a tripod, you can get a pan tilt zoom head that you can put these fixed cameras on. So the little mini camera has a little mini pan tilt zoom head that's very cute. And for the larger camcorders and fixed box cameras, you can get a larger pan tilt zoom head there too. And so there you go.
When you
Now,
say head, you mean you're talking about a mount, correct? Mounting it on a
the
tripod?
mount, yes, the
Okay.
pan tilt zoom mount, exactly.
Did
Now,
you
do
talk
we
about the
have
zoom
any?
level? There are two questions, but before that, did you talk about 20x, 30x, 10x on that
I
slide?
did. I
Okay, I
did,
missed it
yes.
then. Sorry.
Mhm. Do we have any
Okay.
questions? We can
There's a
pause for
couple,
questions.
yes. Let's see. So one person says, George from Brattleboro, Vermont, says he doesn't know how you can help him because he does not know what he doesn't know until he gets back into the sanctuary. Do we want to talk about possibly getting measurements of the sanctuary or?
So how do we choose what cameras to use and where to put them? It kind of depends. Every room will be different. Every sanctuary will be different. Um, some are fairly narrow in width and longer in depth, and some are very wide in width. How wide is your chancel or your stage? Where is the choir? Where does the band stand and perform? Try to think as a photographer. If you were going to try to capture the things that are happening on your chancel and on your stages, what angles would you use? What distance would you use? Um, the farther back you go, the wider of a shot you're going to get. And the farther back you go, in order to get a zoomed in shot, you need a longer lens. Sometimes you might be able to mount pan tilt zoom cameras on walls. Sometimes the walls are too far away. Sometimes you can mount them on a ceiling if it's low enough. Sometimes you have to be creative and put tripods around the facility. It really depends, and every situation is going to be different. Fixed cameras can be good. Little miniature cameras can be good. Even cell phone cameras can be good. Now, cool thing about cell phone cameras is that everybody has one. I won't say that they're inexpensive because they can be as expensive as some of these cameras can be. But if you already have them, well, that's great. Question is, how do you incorporate them into your webcast? Camera is also a computer. You could log into your webcast into Zoom or whatever, and have it appear as its own attendee. You could do that, and then through spotlighting, you can have them appear just like I popped up. But there are other options. If you're using a software switcher like OBS or vMix or something like that, or even if you're using a hardware switcher, you can wirelessly connect your phones to OBS. For instance, there's this really cool application called OBS Ninja. So if you look it up, it's obs.ninja with nothing after it. Ninja is the suffix, is the domain. And that's an application that, and you also download it to your phone. And so what that does is it takes a picture from your phone, wirelessly transmits it, takes a picture from your phone and through a web browser, wirelessly transmits it to your computer. And from your computer, you can put it into OBS. And so, in that way, you don't even have to use Wi-Fi. You're using the broadband capabilities of your phone. And that also means that it won't appear as a secondary attendee on your Zoom call. And you can have multiple cameras doing this and choose between any of them. And that's something that we can get into at another time, is different ways to get these cameras into your switching system. In fact, one of the very important things about choosing a camera is how it's going to connect to your switcher. There are I can think of maybe a half a dozen different connection technologies. There's HDMI, USB, SDI, NDI, HD-based-T, and a few others. Each one of them has their pros and cons. Each one has their uses, and there are times when you would not want to use them. So that's a whole topic that we can spend a segment on, with some very useful information that I'm sure you'll. And so this OBS Ninja, how do you get your cell phone to come into your switching system, will be part of that conversation. Next question.
Is regarding camera zoom. How do you know if a camera is providing optical zoom or digital zoom?
So the camera specs will tell you what the ratio of both are, right? So optical zoom is strictly using the lens. So there are moving parts in the lens, just like on a if anybody was study photography in school or has a still camera with a zoom lens, you rotate the barrel and that moves a lens element in the barrel, and that changes the focal length of the camera, of the lens, right? So a camera that has optical and digital zoom will specify both ratios. And when you're controlling the camera through software, you'll have the ability to either select which one you want to use, or if there's just one control, it will start with optical until it gets to the end of its range, and then it will start using the digital zoom.
Excellent.
Next question.
Bill Newhouse from Rockville, Maryland says, I've noticed on-field close-up sports camera that, I'm sorry, gotta try that again. On-field close-up sports cameras that focus on the player who just scored and everything else is blurry. Have you seen any movement to having the minister in focus with the background blurry?
Anybody on the panel want to take that one? Leo.
So what your experience is something called BOC, which you're seeing with me. So if you look here, I'm in focus. If I sit back, I'm out of focus. So the focus depth of me is very narrow. This works quite well if you're on something where you want to draw the focus, and also when you know where it is. The problem is it doesn't work really well if you have a minister who is prone to flight. Unless you can tie them down, it's going to cause you've got a problem. So there is a reason. So how do they solve that? A good question, actually, in the reverse is, how do they solve that in live sport, when you've got to be able to, if you ever watched it when a ball or something is traveling around the pitch, and literally it's always, everything is in focus. If you look at that, you'll see the cameras. If you ever go to a sports event, the cameras the actual lens is about 3 foot, 4 foot long. It's a big chunky lens because it works out how to keep every single thing in focus. And it costs about 50 grand.
So, yeah, well, and so would we use this in church? I think so. Depends on your chancel, depends on the depth of your stage, both for the person at the lectern and even for music. If you have a soloist, for instance, in front of a choir, and you might want to use shallow depth of field to focus on the soloist, whether that be a vocal soloist or an instrumentalist. If you have a deep performance stage and say a window behind or something like that, or a scene or something, you may want to blur out the background while the choir is performing, so that people are actually looking at the choir or the band. When you have somebody who is walking in front on the floor, like a minister who likes to roam around or Story for All Ages or something like that, you may want to use a narrow depth of field. It's a technique that is not, it takes some time to master, but can be used for some very dramatic effect. Let's see, there's one other area that kind of camera that, yeah, let's do that first. Let's go to Mark on the panel, who has actually something to show us.
I was actually going to suggest Leo show the synagogue and what a pan-tilt zoom camera actually does. And then we can move over into why lighting is important for those pan-tilt zoom cameras.
All right, yeah, let's do that. Okay,
thank you. So what we're looking at here is a typical shot that you're seeing at the moment. You're seeing at the back. This synagogue is about a mile away from where I am, and the cameras are a make of the ones of the PTZ cameras or PTZ cameras that Marty demonstrated earlier. So what I'm going to do now, hopefully, if I can click on the right button, or it should be that, is we're now seeing the actual computer that's controlling those cameras, and we're going to be using the software that's broadcasting to you is vMix, but for the simplicity for this, I'm going to actually control the camera using the PTZ Optics control panel. So I can take the camera that we're looking at here, and you can see this also in your view that you'll see the other one of it pinned directly, and I can zoom in into there. So you can do this all manually, and as you can see, I can zoom straight in, and I can find an angle and a shot here, and that would be the shot of that pulpit. So there's typically, and I'm going to show you what a service looks like in a minute. So that's one of the pulpits, and then the second pulpit is there. Obviously, that's quite clunky to do that. So one way that you do all of this in advance is that you put in presets. So most PTZ cameras, in fact, all PTZ cameras have presets that you can actually load in. And we've got the presets sitting down here so that we can load them up. And they're already done into various set scenes. So I'm just moving the cameras around at the moment to get the relevant scenes. What you then add to that scenes is you add in slides. So we can bring in slides, so we can bring in the liturgy. That's the actual liturgy. And then you bring it all together so that you then end up with, and I'm going to choose the right one, I hope. I've got to get the right ones. No, I can't get it. I've got to get the right ones in a minute. Hold on. I've got to find where they put them. I can't find them. But I'll get to there in a second. Actually, it'll be easier to show it to you in the live event. But to come back on the actual cameras and the distance, if I take this camera and I zoom in, actually, first of all, let me zoom out so you can actually see the distance, so you can get an understanding for the distance that we're dealing with. It isn't at night time, so it is dark, but if I just show you down onto the floor slightly, you should just about be able to calculate in your mind how far that is. So the cameras are on this wall that you can see, the balcony wall. That's this white wall on the right of the picture. They're mounted on there. They're mounted around about 10 to 12 feet off the ground. And then you can see that I can pan around so you can see the stage, or what we call the bimmer, but they're in front of us. We also have, and it's dark as you can see, our choir stands at the moment because we've got because we're in lockdown. Our choir, which typically is 1 or 2 people, will be on that area there. So that shows you how far. Just so you can see the cameras, as I said, these are the PTZ Optics ones. They are the ones with the smaller sensors. But this is to give you an idea of how deep or how close you can go in. We will go into in a synagogue. There is a light that's there's an ever burning light above the ark. That's the light that you can see there in front of you.
Leo, is this a 20x or a 30x camera?
This is the 30x. Thank you, Jo. This is the 30x camera. So I'm going to go in on the 30x camera, and I'm obviously moving it by hand is a little bit difficult, but I'm just going to show you how close you can get in. So that is it at full zoom in. If I go down, because the rest of the lights are not on, you can see that I can see basically the nails that are holding the leaves on. And if you want to zoom back out again to see how far we are looking, if I go all the way back out again to right to the extreme of the zoom, that should give you an idea of what you're able to achieve with a 30x camera in a fixed location on there. So what does this look like in a service? So this is a service that I'm going to try and bring up, so you should be able to see me again. I need to bring myself up so I can see. And I've just taken, this was the service from the last week. I just need to bring up the right tab. I'm going to go to the beginning so you can see. So you'll see the choir is here, and then I'm not got the music. You can't hear it. I've on purpose, but you'll see that what you have is the transitions will go, because you've got two cameras. They'll go from this view to the other view, and you won't see a movement of the camera, because you've basically, as they go between one camera or another, then you're moving, the camera's already in the preset locations. So we're delivering that. Then the last thing that I'm going to show on the camera side is I'm just scrolling through, and we get to the point, by the way, that you can see all the liturgy is on the left hand side. That's being moved in there, and I'll show you that was coming from that machine. I'm just going to go to, here we go. So if I stop on here and I just show you what you're looking at, you can see on the rabbi, just in front of the rabbi is another camera that's looking down, and that camera is looking at the Torah, the Sefer Torah, the Hebrew that you're looking at on the left hand side. And as he reads, as you can see, it's moving, so you're seeing the two angles of that. That's a different camera. Now that is also a PTZ optics, but it's basically a webcam on a stick that's going into there.
And where is that camera mounted?
You can see it right in front of his face, actually. If you look, you can see the camera. Can you see the camera in front of his face? It's that
on
camera
the curved
there.
arm.
On the curved arm, yeah. It's just basically on there. We've tried a few different ways, but we found that seems to work, because you get in. Interestingly, the thing is, you're seeing something that before lockdown, literally nobody was able to ever see what it looks like, because you just don't see this.
That's very cool.
The last thing I'm going to show you, and just so that you'll be interested, the lady on the left, the rabbi on the left, all of those camera angles that we've just looked at, all that camera movement, she's doing that all on her, in front of her. She's got the Stream Deck. She's doing all of that. She's in control. That we have a woman in control on the Bimmer that controls all the cameras, and she does all of the changes to all the camera angles that we've just looked at.
Now, are there 2 or 3 cameras in this sanctuary? 2
PTZ optics cameras, that 2 pan tilt zooms, and the Torah cam, the one that looks down.
So you could actually set up a shot where you have both rabbis there, and where one camera is looking at one rabbi and one camera is looking at the other rabbi, and be able to switch between them.
Yeah.
And then and then while the side camera is looking at, I suppose that would be the female rabbi, the camera in the back could be widening out for the next shot and do a 2-shot. So
yeah, we can.
One rabbi, other rabbi, 2-shot.
That's exactly what we typically do that. What we don't do, we don't normally have 2 camera shots on the screen. The 2 times we have 2 camera shots showing on the screen at the same time is when we have the liturgy, is when we have the Torah cam, which you saw on there, or when we have a person who's remote. So we will bring somebody in remote to do a blessing, or bring somebody in who's doing a reading, etc., under lockdown, and then you'll have that. But we wouldn't put up 2 cameras, use the 2 cameras at the same time.
Oh, I meant as a single shot. So are there times?
Yeah, that's exactly. If I go back to
the 2 rabbis are like trading off parts of the reading.
That's exactly what's actually happening. Is if you look, we are actually only using at any time you're going for, there is the 2 camera shot, there's the 2 rabbi shot, there is the single rabbi shot, and actually that now is then when he's doing his sermon. So you go into a close-up of him because you remove the liturgy on the left-hand side. So all of that's done, and every single time there's a camera movement, you don't see it. So now we go back to the choir. You're never seeing a camera movement. If you do, it's by accident. You will never see a pan, tilt, zoom. It's always being done off. The camera move is done off camera. Sorry, I can't see you, JLo, which is why you've got your hand up.
That's
and I
okay.
can't.
Yeah, I noticed that when you were panning and zooming with that camera before, sometimes it can be kind of jerky. It's not very smooth, and the farther you zoom in, the more jerky that any movement will be because it happens in steps, right? Is that right?
Yes and no. If I do it by hand, it's really horrible. And if you do it you can actually control virtually all of them can be controlled by a joystick. Most of the PTZ cameras out in the market can be controlled by an Xbox controller. Am I right? Not PlayStation. I'm pretty sure it's the Xbox controller.
I think so.
So you can control it all by an Xbox controller, but you can do a huge amount of things.
Which means that any 8-year-old can operate it.
Well, there is an argument that actually 8-year-olds or game players are much better at controlling PTZ cameras than other people.
The more expensive the camera, the better the servos and motors in them, the smoother they'll operate, and many of them actually have ballistics built into them for acceleration and deceleration of the image. So they'll start out slow and ramp up their speed as you try and scan across, and as soon as you let go, they slow down and stop. And those are all adjustable things in the more expensive cameras.
And while that may sound trivial, they are really nice features.
He set up scenes too, right? So that you can you can hit one scene and then go to the next scene, and it does what it has to do smoothly for you.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to show you very quickly another use of these exact same cameras. So we had to do a wedding in the summer, and this is the bride. This was, in pure lockdown. The bride is coming in. This is on a PTZ, on exactly this same model. Yeah, it was the same model camera. So there she is. She's coming in on a PTZ camera, and we were able to. I missed the bit. You can actually sometimes see the camera, and we had 2 cameras, and we were doing everything remotely because we had to be distanced. We were in a little cubby hole around the corner, and we were taking all the pictures of that with 2 PTZ cameras. We were doing it all remotely. And you can see that you get all the angles that you want out of PTZ cameras, and I'm hopeful I can just actually see if I can see one in the background of the pictures anywhere. But
Leo, how are you connecting to these cameras?
Exactly what I was going to say. There's 2 questions in the box about connecting.
Right. Okay. So typically most of the modern PTZ cameras have an HDMI connection out the back, a SDI connection, and most importantly, they have an Ethernet connection, which they have 2 things. You do the control of the camera's movements is done over that using some protocols, but also you can also get a picture using NDI, which is the network version of video control. Video picture. In all of this, we always use SDI, particularly in this, because we were running about 200 feet, and that's, to me, outdoors 200 feet. SDI is a pretty solid thing. I'm just trying to see if I can see the cameras. I can't. We had to do this all remote because it turned out this was in London. The bride's parents were in Canada. The bride's brother was in New York, and her other brother was in Tel Aviv, and we brought them all in on the cameras, as you can see here. This is the bit we brought them in, but that's another matter. I just was hoping I was going to be able to show you the camera, but I can't find a bit where we cut across the cameras.
Wait, talk a little bit more
we're
about.
so professional. We didn't do it.
connections. It's great, Leo. Can we talk
Okay.
a little bit more about how things were
Sure.
connected? So there's someone that's asking about incorporating the mixer. I would imagine he's referring to the sound mixer. So are the cameras connected to the mixer with cables or Wi-Fi? Is the question. And then there's another question about how is the Torah camera connected, USB or wireless, or how is that one connected as well?
Sure. Okay. So the cameras that we were looking in here in the synagogue were using SDI. So they're connected via this. It's like it's a coax cable. So they're using the coax cable to connect from the camera to the computer. The computer is running vMix or OBS. It used to be running OBS, but it's now running vMix.
Is there anything in between the camera and the computer? Is there an adapter or a switcher?
Yes. So no, there's no switcher. What there is we bring them in on a capture card. So the advantage, there's lots of different ways of doing this, but when you go to a completely software revision, and I'll go back, hopefully I can, if I can go back to vMix here. With vMix, you're bringing in the cameras are connected in. Sorry, I've just got to see if I can bring it in. That magic. There it is. Video setup. The cameras are connected in by this card here. Hopefully, you can just about make out the picture. And this card has 8 HDMI as 8 SDI connections on it. The typical one, this is an 8-port, but normally you get a 4-port one. So it has 4 of these coax cables that you connect in, and that connects the camera in. The advantage of doing it this way over a physical mix, and we can talk about that another time, is that I'm able, as we were talking about, I can actually bring in multi angles. I'm trying to see if I can find one. I think if I go somewhere around here, I can bring in multiple views on a single picture, but I can't find one. She's got there's so many. This is the advantage of vMix, as you can see. There's 32 different camera angles that have been set up for doing various different settings, because it really is a full production system.
And those are like preset scenes, right? You set your
Yeah,
scene on each camera.
Yeah, so each camera. So I'm literally so this is camera 1 arc, camera 1 right bimmer, camera 1 left, and that's a zoom in of it and a zoom in of it. But you would never use the cameras, the videos direct. You don't select those. You set them all up as your presets. You set up all your presets, and then you go and select anything using the Stream Deck. So if I go to the Stream Deck, which is disconnected at the moment, but I go to Leah's deck.
I would love to clarify. So from the camera, out SDI
Sure.
from the camera into the capture card, out of the capture card into the computer.
The capture card is inside of the computer. Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. And then you're running OBS or vMix or something.
Yep.
And you're using Stream Deck on top of that to control your camera angles and scenes.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
All of this is a discussion for another session. We're at the front end of cameras and lighting.
Exactly.
The next step is, what do you send all the cameras to? And it can either be a production switcher that's an external device that does all of your mixing for you. It can be a software-oriented device like what Leo is showing us here. But we should probably dedicate an entire show to how do you do the video mixing and all of that, and the different techniques and things that you can, and tips and tricks.
Indeed. There will be an episode that where we compare software switchers to hardware switchers and interfacing.
Yep.
And what kind of, and the different ways that you can transport video between cameras and the switchers. There's one thing I wanted to clarify, because the question was very interesting in the way it was worded. It asked, how are the cameras connected to the mixer? And at first I thought maybe he made a mistake because, as J-Lo suggested, she's maybe audio mixer. But what's interesting is that in the US, we think of the device that selects different cameras to be shown on the screen as a camera switcher. But in Europe and the UK, they refer to that same device as a vision mixer. Isn't that right?
They did. They don't. I mean, it is. You're right. You're right. Vision mixing is the term, but it's because I think because you see it so often. I normally hear when I hear the word camera switcher, I think of it, or I talk about the ATEM. You know, it's become almost the word ATEM has become universal in the thing.
That's true. I've in all of the in the international broadcast events that I've participated, such as Olympics and such, I meet people from all over the world, and it's interesting to hear, the names that different places like assign to things like vision mixer or switcher, or it's kind of cool.
So I think the key the key takeaway I hope you're getting from this in the pictures is that the PTZ cameras are really flexible in what you're doing. So if you're looking at something and you're trying to work out where you're going to put a camera, it's flexible. The other thing I would say, and that is really key to this, when we set this synagogue up initially, we didn't mount any of the cameras. We put them on tripods initially, and we left them on tripods for a number of weeks to see where we are. Because once you start screwing things to the wall and start running cables permanently, you've effectively done the install. And we found that there was a couple of things that got you in a service that you just didn't realize were going to happen, and that a certain physical location that we thought would work didn't work, and we had to make a couple of adjustments. So, but you can see where we did it.
That's a great tip. Thanks. And so just to point out, using those preset scenes that Leo was demonstrating, where, one scene will have the camera looking at this place and another scene will have the camera looking at that place. And those are all set up in advance, and they can be changed at any time, but you set those up in advance so that during the service, you're not using a joystick or a manual control to move your cameras around from place to place, which can be very imprecise and maybe early or late. You're simply selecting between all of the presets that you have, which makes it real easy to switch and very accurate. So that's a really, really good feature of pan-tilt zoom cameras. And those presets are available in a software switcher, as Leo was demonstrating. But if you're using a hardware switcher, you can also use a hardware camera controller, which essentially does the same function. So it's a device, looks like something like a keyboard, where you select from amongst all of your cameras. You can select camera 1, camera 3, camera 10. And then you can control its pan-tilt zoom, and you can also control its iris and its focus and its zoom. All from one keyboard, you're controlling all of your cameras. So there are options if you choose to use a hardware switcher. Now there's one other kind of camera that people have asked about because it's a very interesting prospect. And that's called, it's a type of pan-tilt zoom camera, but it's called a tracking camera. And I'm going to show a demonstration here. And there's no audio, so I'm going to narrate. So it's a pan-tilt zoom camera that
Recognize this one, Jay?
locks onto somebody and then follows them as they move around the space. And so there's a picture of what the camera looks like. You might not even know the difference when you see it. Doesn't matter how fast you move or whether you turn your back, it will still follow you along. And it keeps you in the frame. Now, here's somebody who's walking across the frame and the camera just ignored them. So it really locks on to that first person. So It's got actually two cameras. It's got the regular camera and it's got that little button in the bottom there. Let me go back to that. This little thing right here is a wide angle full view camera. And both of these are 1080p cameras. And the reason for that, and so this one has two SDI outputs, one for each of those cameras. And it has an Ethernet connection for upgrading, and it's got an RS-232 for control, and it's got power. And it even has an audio input if you wanted to send audio to it. And this one has a 20-time optical zoom. And the full view camera is a wide angle 92 degree. And this is showing both cameras at the same time. So you can get a wide shot of the room and also have the tracking camera, and you can select between them on your switcher, or you can show both of them if you want to. But this is showing the differences between the two. You can mount it on the wall using a variety of mounts. And, you know, that's very cool. Now, there is another little video that I want to show, and it's just going to take me a moment to find it because it demonstrates another aspect of these things. Coming right up. Okay, so now, so this is a person who's walking across the field, and somebody else is going to come in, and she's going to hand off the tracking target to him. So now the camera is following him. And so if you have people who are moving in and out, this is one of the ways and it did that automatically, which is very cool. So the way that happens is, and I was trying to find a video to show this. In the setup, you pull up the camera and you're looking at the widescreen camera, and on your screen, you draw out using a marker, a virtual marker, you draw out a zone on the screen that is the target inclusion zone. So in that particular shot, the blackboard that was on the wall would be the target zone. So anywhere that she moved within that zone, the camera will follow her. And if she moved out of that zone, the camera would not follow her out of the zone. It would stay in the zone. Now, there's also a home zone. So the handoff used that home zone. So she went over to the home area, and the next person that came on, the gentleman, he stood in the home zone. The camera knows anybody who's in that zone is now the one that the camera needs to track. So there's that kind of control. It also has exclusion zones. So there may be areas of the frame where you want the camera to intentionally ignore, and you would draw those out on your screen as well. So there may be an inclusion zone that's in the front of the stage, but behind the pulpit in the back, there may be other people milling around that may be within the zone, but you want to make sure that the camera doesn't try to grab them and track them. So these things have a lot of controls and a lot of flexibility. And the big benefit is that if you have people who are moving around in your scene, you don't have to manually follow them to keep them in focus and close up. It also does autofocusing. J-Lo.
Marty, I know that it could totally be another show how to connect these things. However, we did suggest to people ahead of time that if they were going to be thinking about what they needed to do to prep, we asked them to do cabling, right? So what kinds of cable would they need to lay out to that mounting where that camera is mounting? They need SDI, and do they need Ethernet as well? And if we could talk a little bit about how the information gets from the camera to the the brains.
Well, I don't mind touching on that, but yes, that will be part of another show. So with a pan-tilt zoom camera, there are 3 types of signals that you need to connect to it. There's video, there's control for the motors, and there's power. And between all the different types of connections, some of them will handle only one of them. Some will handle 2, some might handle all 3. Like NDI, which is a network technology, can actually handle all 3 types of signals in one cable. But SDI may only handle 1 or 2, depending on the application. So it's part of camera selection. It's part of your system plan. You can't, it's not really a good idea to pick cameras before you know what the rest of your system is looking like, what kind of switchers you're going to use, whether it's going to be a network-based system or a more traditional individually wired-based system. You really need to do a system plan and have everything accounted for before you go out and select or commit to selecting specific pieces of equipment.
Thank you.
Leo.
I would, the only thing I would counter slightly with that, and I've had this discussion with Mark as well, is that in the cabling perspective, the cabling isn't necessarily, you know, as you said, there are 3 different points, but typically most newer cameras that are the PTZ cameras will carry the power over their power connection rather than you having to plug in. So it's over a network cable. So if you're going to run anything and you need to, and because cable contractors take time to come in, it takes time to prep, it's probably one of the longest elements of the whole of the road is to get the cabling in. And if you're going to get cabling in now, I would be saying that you would be running the Cat6 cabling, and you'd be running, my preference is to run SDI as well at the same time, because if you're pulling it, when the 2 people are standing there pulling cables in, the cheap bit is actually the cable. The expensive thing is the time and labor and the pathing, and it's just pull them in. And I would pull in an SDI cable, which is that coax, and I would be pulling in the HDMI cable. And there are some cameras that do use a different type of cable for signaling, but I don't think we're going to go down there at this moment in time. That would be my port, Jay.
But there's also signal conveyance where you may need 2 coaxial cables. In some cases, and if you're, I don't know that anybody that's part of this has a really extensively large sanctuary, but if you did, if you're going to pull cable anyway, you might pull fiber as well, because fiber can often carry everything other than power at some point in time, and that's sort of a future-proofing upgrade if you're going to make the cable run anyway.
And for
Well, that's interesting. I haven't seen any cameras, any of these types of cameras that use fiber, but you can certainly convert between fiber and any of these cameras. So particularly in a large, very large room, fiber would be good to have. Or if you were going to run wires between rooms, fiber is always good to use as well. And it does future-proof, because a lot of things are going to fiber. And Cat 5, Cat 6 has a distance limitation of 330 feet, in some cases a little bit less, before you need to put a device in there to reboost it and reclock and reshape up the signals.
Just
Whereas
to clarify,
fiber doesn't
somebody
have
asked
that
a
limitation.
question. Somebody asked a question. I hope I used the word Cat 6. I may have mispronounced, or it may be. It probably is. It's more likely I mispronounced than you misheard. I didn't say Ethernet. The reason I didn't say Ethernet is because although sometimes you can say the 2 words and translate, they do mean a different thing. Some of this isn't Ethernet signaling, and so it is.
Good point.
It will be Ethernet cabling, but it's not Ethernet signaling. I know that I'm being a bit picky, but I'm not trying to be cross.
No, that's a good distinction. Ethernet Ethernet
'Cause-
refers to the signals that are being transported on the wire. It does not
because
refer to the wire itself.
because sometimes what you end up is that people think they put two Ethernet hubs and they'll try and plug something in to get an HDMI repeater to go over it. It's like that doesn't work, because it uses the same cable, but it will need all the pairs in that cable to do that, and it has to have a dedicated path. So that's why you typically hear people talk about. Well, I always, if I say Cat 5, I actually mean Cat 6. It's just historical. It's just everything now is Cat 6 or better in anything you do.
So it's safe to say Category 6 cable carries Ethernet, but it can also convey other types of signals besides Ethernet.
HDBaseT, audio, any number
Right.
of things.
Yeah, and H10 base T, if I pronounced it right, Mark, is actually super interesting for people who are running projectors and things like that, because it controls the signaling of the projector as well as the picture.
Well,
Right,
now
you
you're
can-
getting into the weeds, Leo.
Yeah, if you get into bigger systems and you're starting to use, Crestron, AMX, their products like SVSI, DM, NVX. There's a whole product category for Pro AV, and that whole category is lots of money. So it's
sorry.
So let's
Probably
just
something-
shelve
My
that
fault.
for
It's my
now.
fault. We're in the weeds.
it's probably something you won't end up getting to, but it is
the key.
important to remember that
Yeah.
if you do end up in a situation where where you're likely to use one of the bigger ones, even Cat 6 may not be the right thing. The manufacturer will tell you specifically what cable to use. For example, AMX, with one of their product lines, it has to be Cat 6A shielded, period, the end, or they won't guarantee the performance of the system. So it all depends on the platform you choose, the cables. So while getting the cable installed ahead of time is very important, a little bit of attention needs to be paid to where you think you're going. Leo's suggestion of pull one or two SDIs and definitely pull two category cables to each location. It's a great way to keep yourself safe.
And indeed, some of these cameras give you multiple ways to connect. So some of the PTZ cameras will have SDI and HDMI. Some of them will be NDI and HDMI or SDI. And so you have your choice of which way you want to connect to your cameras, which is real nice because, you may want to install them with SDI, but then you may have an outdoor event as Leo showed us, and you may want to pull those cameras off the wall temporarily. And when you go out there, you may use HDMI or something like that.
That's exactly what we did, but we actually went to NDI at that time because we needed to power them as well, and running them across grass has been mentioned, because NDI is an Ethernet connection or a Cat 6 connection, and you can put power in at the same time. When you're running across grass, you don't want to be running as many cables as you need as few as cables as possible.
Deborah asked a great question. Something I may have missed is auto tracking was covered. Is this always a feature of the camera, or can it be a feature of the control system? In other words, if you choose the wrong camera, is auto tracking never going to be possible? The answer to that is a qualified yes. If you want an auto tracking camera and you really want it to be done well, you should buy an auto tracking camera. For example, the One Beyond camera that Marty was showing you is made by a company called One Beyond. It's an AI style auto tracking camera. It's using artificial intelligence to make the decisions about what to follow and what to do. You can use a PTZ camera and use audio-based triggering to call presets and have the camera go there. That's typically a more kludgy solution. It tends to be a little bit jumpy. You have to tune the audio very carefully to make it work. So while you're not completely locked out of doing auto tracking or at least preset calls, if you use a regular PTZ camera, you'll get much lower results by using audio triggers rather than using an AI camera. Especially for this group, I think an AI camera, if you have a roaming minister, is probably the best choice. The camera Marty was showing you, however, does come at a cost. It's about $6,000 for that camera.
There's a, it's more. There's
It's
another brand though.
Well, he was showing us the one beyond, and that one starts
Right.
at $6,000 and goes
Right.
up from there. They also make audio triggered systems, but they start at about $15,000 and go up from there.
I think Video 360 has something that starts at 3,500. Am I remembering that correctly, Marty? I think it's kind of
Video 360 might be a little less expensive.
But 3,500 is still a lot of money.
Yeah.
Still a lot of money. Yep.
And
put that
there'll be big
Sorry.
differences in how well they work as well.
Yeah, and if your minister stays within a fairly narrow range, Hudley makes an AI camera that's a lot less expensive that actually works pretty satisfactorily. So there's lots of choices out there.
To put that into perspective, and although Marty covered it already, the two cameras I showed earlier, or the ones I was showing you live, those ones are the 30X, the PTZs. There's a number of other makes. Another one out there is a Bird Dog, which is another make, which was the pictures that Marty was showing at the beginning. They're typically under the $2,000 mark at the moment, somewhere around that figure for those cameras.
Does Bird Dog make an auto tracking camera?
No, both of them are saying that they're going. I was going to say, to do the comparison figures, it's like you sort of you hit the limits about 2,000 is where you're going to be. The semi pro range of PTZs. Once you move into the auto tracking or you want to go really pro, you're going up. And the big difference on the pro PTZ cameras are much better sensors. So the low light on those cameras is okay, but they're not going to be doing your super low light stuff as you saw.
Speaking of lighting,
and that's it.
let's
Thank you.
transition to
Let's
lighting.
make sure. Before we go, let's check the question area and see if there's anything that we can answer before we move on.
Got to do it office hour style, quick.
Yep. Speed round. Could Cat 6 be used for power and control? The answer is for
Qualified,
NDI, yes. For NDI, yes. If you're using SDI, whether you can also use Cat 6 for power and control would depend on the camera, if the manufacturer's made it that way. Anything else?
I think we hit them all.
Just the request to
And
talk about lighting.
NDI actually is Ethernet over that Cat 6, just for clarification. All right, so let's move on to lighting.
All right. So I'm going to show you. You've all seen this once before early on in this series. I'm going to share my screen here.
Can I introduce the topic before
Yeah, go for it.
to a demo? All right. So lighting is a science of human perception. Our eyes are amazingly adaptable to an extremely wide range of conditions and colors. They can make our brains believe that shades of yellow or reds or blues or grays are actually white. They will look white to our eyes under the right conditions. Our eyes can tolerate a huge range of light intensity. They can measure 3D space. Cameras are much more literal. They gather a limited amount of light and detect levels of intensity and wavelengths, which is what we call color, within that grid of squares that I showed you as being called a sensor, and converts them into electrical signal. Video cameras don't make assumptions or do interpretations like our eyes do, not in most cases anyway. So lighting is what makes a video image look engaging. It can set a mood, it creates contrast and definition, it creates a sense of space and separation between objects at different distances. Lighting can draw your eyes to the important part of a video frame while providing context in the rest of the frame. For instance, if there's a shot of somebody sitting at home and there's this window right here that is really brightly lit, your eyes will be instantly drawn to that window instead of the person who is on screen, because it is a brighter part of the picture and your eyes are naturally drawn to the brightest part of the picture. So we're going to look at different kinds of lighting and the effects that they can have. We're going to talk about the differences between LED and conventional lighting, electrical requirements, the very basics of stage lighting design, lighting angles, lighting controls, and why you might want to use color. Okay, thank you very much. Mark, take it away.
All right, hopefully this won't crash. You should be seeing a sanctuary. Good, okay. This is in Barrow, Alaska, Utqiagvik. It's the Presbyterian Church there. I showed this once before. I'm controlling this church's system from Massachusetts. What I'm showing here is what it looks like when you have really bad lighting. There's some fluorescent lights in the sanctuary, and that's all that's lighting up what's happening up on the in the chancel there. I'm going to change the lighting in here a bit. What happens if we turn on a spotlight on the pulpit? It will suddenly make that seem a little bit more important in the picture, and anyone standing there will be well lit. But what if we take a look at some,
Mark, can I just interrupt just one second? So something that's interesting in Zoom, because this just happened to me. If it happened to me, it might be happening to other people. If you're using if you see the sanctuary in a separate frame, what happened to me was my frame was so zoomed in that I was only seeing these hanging microphones here. And so I went to the top of that frame called View Options, and there's a selection there called Zoom Ratio, and I selected Fit to Window, and now I'm seeing the whole thing. So just if anybody else, if that was happening to anybody else, I thought I might help out. Thanks.
So we talked at one point about backlighting and what happens if there's too much light behind what you're trying to look at. What you're trying to look at ends up in a silhouette. That's exactly what's happening here. I've lit up the lights behind the pulpit without putting any light on the pulpit, and now the pulpit is dark. We discussed once before, what happens when you have bright windows behind your pulpit. This is exactly what happens, especially on camera. Again, having a light that lights up the pulpit will bring it out of the dark and make it more noticeable. We can turn on choir spotlights, make sure the choir can be seen. We can turn on more of the lights in the sanctuary, see what effect it has on the overall image. I can even turn on the pulpit reading light if I want to. You'll see it go up. There we go. And there's even an altar spot on here so that you can light up the altar. And in the back of the room, not that it matters for what we're talking about, but just because it's fun, in the back of the room there's a mural on the wall there, and we can turn on the spotlight on the mural. Suddenly Jesus is spotlighted.
Cool. That's cool.
I didn't want to get too far into the weeds on the lighting, however, because that is a topic that we'd really like to have a person standing in a light in a theatrical situation we've discussed having, I can do this at my church. I can set it up so that we can do a full lighting exposition that will show you the differences between key, fill, backlighting, how backlighting will create halos and give depth, how side lighting can give depth and get rid of the 2D effect, the paper doll images that quite often happen. And we can do a demonstration of how those different kinds of lighting angles will completely change the mood of what you're looking at. There's other tricks you can play that will help the eyes. For example, with the correct angle of lighting and the correct filters in those lights, you can create a 3D effect or more 3D than you would expect, rather than just shining a bright light on them or hitting them with a fluorescent fixture. It's one of the challenges in doing lighting for a hybrid service is you are paying attention to both what the people in the sanctuary or the meeting house are experiencing and what the camera needs to get the image to the other end. I would offer that the cameras these days have gotten so good that if you make a really pleasing image for the people in the room, many cameras will be able to accommodate the lighting that you're providing. It doesn't hurt to pay some attention to sweetening the lighting for the camera. But if you do pay primarily attention to making it look really good for people in the room, it's probably going to look pretty decent on the camera as well.
I have an example, Mark, of an iPhone shooting a stage.
Oh, yeah.
Can I share my screen?
Absolutely.
That was unintentional, and you couldn't even tell. I'm not sure I was the one who actually filmed this, but I came out with the same sort of footage afterwards. I couldn't even tell this was happening at the time of shooting.
Yeah.
That this blue light is painted. So that is the risk of filming with an iPhone right there. Blue. That's all.
So the question is, how far can people go with lighting? You can actually get an awful lot done with a minimum amount of money. Circle of Friends Coffee House, for example, the artists often exclaim, "Oh my, wow, how do you get such good theatrical lighting in a church?" And it's like, didn't take much. It took cheap disco par cans placed in the right places, some filters to give us different colors and different looks. We do it with a minimum of lighting, but you just use your creativity. Yeah. You don't have to spend a ton of money on a lighting rig to get really good effects. You don't have to go out and buy all ETC source 4s. You don't have to have an expensive lighting desk to do all of this stuff. In fact, you probably don't, because you're just going to get in trouble. Do a really good job lighting once and you'll be in good shape. But again, it can be done with really inexpensive fixtures. We've been using our cheap DJ par cans for 20 years now, and they're doing a fine job for us.
We bought some used theater equipment to get some good lighting for the nighttime shows of the coffee house, and we built mounts on the balcony I think maybe there's 5 total lights, but we bought them for cheap as a theater company was upgrading their lighting system. We bought their old lights for about $200 and mounted them, and they worked wonderfully.
I think I want to point
LEDs or conventional lighting.
I don't remember. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I don't remember.
I think I wanted
I don't think they were LEDs. They had gels. Sorry. They were old. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, sorry. I wanted to point out some of the things that Mark had really well laid out that I think are important in the lighting system in the church he showed us, where a lot about lighting is about putting light where you want it, but also about like not putting light where you don't want it, right? So like a lot of the
Yes.
a lot of the control is a lot of the thinking that is behind the system that Mark showed is like how do you want to control it? How do you want to zone it? How do you want to turn this on and turn that off, right? So when we're getting from like the next level up of disco park hands pointed at the pulpit, which is great and kind of I think what we have at our church mostly, you know, is thinking about like, okay, what do we want to light and also not light? What do we want to light in terms of people and light in terms of architecture, and then how to control the balance between those two, which is to me about like the big difference where I think of going from like room lighting to camera lighting is about almost about being able to turn down the background or turn up the, you know, in relation to each other. And so like the next step in systems is beyond like the lighting is putting in dimming that you can more finely control. Now some you might have like slide switches on the wall and that can help because you can like fine tune those. But having like you know, you can get fairly inexpensive electronic remotely controlled dimming that would help with that a lot. And also, again, towards the future, if you have that kind of dimming system set up, then as you seek more and more fine tune and remote control, that makes that possible. Like you can't remotely control the, you know, the sliders on your wall, but you can remotely control if that is like an electronically controlled dimmer.
Now, David, you're a theater director by trade, right?
I am, and I actually came through from lighting, yeah. And I'm seeing your
And
big black beautiful screen, Mark. I don't know if you're trying to show us something.
Yes.
Okay.
he may be preparing for something later.
Uh,
So in theater, you know, when you're doing something on stage, lighting is really important because it draws your eye to certain parts of the stage and keeps your eyes off of other parts of the stage, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's like, yeah, in theater you don't have a camera, right, to do the cut and do the shot. You kind of have lighting and staging working together to say, okay, now look at this, now look at this, now look at this. And so lighting works like that. And that can be yeah, I don't easily and readily see that as like the same function in worship services, although that would make worship even more exciting, I think.
Well,
I'm making
so,
another
you know,
attempt here to show this is our sanctuary, and we've cleared everything off of the stage. And it's pretty simple. We've got a scrim hanging in the back. There's a single pipe with some park hands, a couple of Source 4 juniors in the back. That's our entire lighting system. But we get all kinds of moods out of that. And with just a couple of other fixtures, I created an Aurora Borealis across that ceiling for Garnett Rogers during one of his shows. You can do a lot with very little. This is not a great example because the scrim's wrinkled and it's a blurry picture. And
There's a great question in the box, Marty, about the color of lighting. So what color light should we use?
color is a real
in
interesting science. But on the basic side, it might surprise some people to find out that there is no such thing as white. I mean, white can be many different things. And we compare them and we relate them, we refer to sunlight. So in the morning, like during the summertime, sunlight is very blue, very cold. No, I'm sorry. It's very warm. It's red, actually, red, yellow, red. It's very warm in the morning because the atmosphere is filtering out a lot of the infrared. When the sun is high at noon, at 2 o'clock, the light is actually blue. It's very cold because more of the infrared gets through the atmosphere because of the angle. At sunset or just before sunset, and I've seen this here several times over the last several months, right outside my door. I will go out just before sunset, and the air, the light, the sky is golden. I mean, true gold. If I look at a building that has a white wall, it's gold. The clouds are gold. We call it actually golden time in photography and in broadcast, because everything just looks so beautiful. So when you're looking at lighting fixtures, even when you buy a light bulb from Home Depot, you'll find warm white, cool white, and sun white or daylight. Each of those are different temperatures of white, and the higher the number, the bluer or colder the light is. So 7,500, and it's referred to in kelvins is the measurement.
I was going to say,
So
which number are you
75
talking about? You're not talking about the wattage, but what number are you talking about?
I'm talking about the color temperature. So what color, what color white it is.
Okay.
And it's all referred to wavelengths. So just like in sound, a low frequency sound has a very long wavelength, and a high frequency sound is a very short wavelength. And we'll get into that at another show. In light is also in wavelengths. And so a longer wavelength is a warmer, redder light, and a higher wavelength is a bluer, colder light. And you can see the differences in how things look. If you were to look at a piece of richly varnished wood, like a desktop or a tabletop, under a warm light, the colors will just come out. It'll look very rich. If you look at it at high noon under sunlight, it'll look very bland. It'll look very uninspiring, very even. It may even look bluish when the color really is red. And so that reflects off of our faces and everything else that's in the view. So so you generally don't do stage lighting with a lot of very high Kelvin cold lighting unless you have a lot of natural daylight that's coming in through windows, in which case you want your interior lighting to kind of match your
that.
natural lighting, because the different colors, when they mix together, can do very strange things. You have a red interior lighting mixing with a blue sunlight. What does that give you? That gives you kind of purplish. Instead of reds or blues, you get purple. So if you're looking at your video screen and you're seeing colors that are kind of have a strange color cast to them, they look kind of orange or yellow or blue or something like that, and you're wondering why, that could be a reason. I know that's probably longer than I wanted to.
We could do that.
To provide
my
that
two
answer,
types of lights right here, right? So I have a cool white LED light on me now. Not quite. And then I can switch that off and put on the typical gold warm light. Two different types of light on my face. This is the warm, and this is cool.
Leo.
So
I look red.
the
Now I
the
look
key.
natural. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, that's fine. The key, like all technology is moving forward, and this is an area where technology has actually moved forward quite a lot in the last 10 years because we've moved over to LED lighting. And the problem was when we first moved to LED lighting, it was very harsh. And it was either those two colors that JLo has just shown you. But that has now morphed, and now you're getting a lot more opportunities, and you get most modern lighting packs that you're buying have the ability for you to control the temperature off once you get over a certain cost spend, obviously. But the key that really brings this all back together that Marty sort of touched on is that a camera will see a color when you tell it what the camera color is looking at, and what you do in typically on a camera is you tell it this is what is white. And when you tell a camera what is white, you by doing a white balance on it, once it knows what white is, it will relate to most other things. So what you've got to do is really going back to what was said by Mark and others is get the room right. And then when you get the room right, you then hold up something that's white to the camera. The camera takes a look at it, says, I know what is white. I will now match that color. That's a very simplistic overview of what you want to do, but effectively you can achieve most things doing that simple approach.
That's exactly the approach that the cable TV company uses when they come to do the Circle of Friends Coffee House. We set up our lighting, everything else, and then we take a whiteboard and we set it on the stage. He aims the camera at it and he does a white balance and on each one of his 3 cameras, and he's good to go.
Right. That's one of the ways that we can match the way different cameras look, whether they be the same camera model or same brand with a different model, or even different brands of cameras with all these different sensors and all of the video processing that goes on in the cameras. They can look very, very different in terms of the luminance level, the color balance, the contrast. They can look very differently. And so doing a white balance and doing a black balance are really the first 2 essential steps to making the cameras see the same thing and produce the same kind of image. There are additional steps that can be taken as well, but those are the 2 things that everybody should be doing with their cameras. And it'll be different at different times of day because, as I mentioned, the daylight changes. So unless you're in a room with no windows and your lighting is your lighting and that doesn't really change, chances are you want to check your white balance pretty much all the time, because even if will also change at different times of the year, every month, every couple of months, because the sun moves. The light color of the sun changes as well, and it will change with clouds or sunlight, clear skies or rainy skies. It all changes. So if you've got the kind of sanctuary that's got a lot of windows and natural light to it, doing a white balance, doing a black balance is very important.
Marty, can you
And
talk to
Leo was referring to controlling these lights, and Mark was controlling these lights. I know a lot of sanctuaries have those dimmers that are mounted up on the wall, and in some cases, those dimmers may not even be inside the sanctuary, where the soundboard and the video switcher is. They may be in a different room, which makes them really hard to make adjustments. And when you have, a dozen or more dimmers on a wall, and each one is controlling one or a set of fixtures, if you want to do a light change, a light level change across the entire room, makes it really difficult to do when you have a dozen different dimmers that you all want to control at the same time. it's workable, but there are compromises. You have to keep a really good chart as to which fixtures each dimmer is controlling, and what the nominal level should be. Like, where is the normal level? Is it at full? Is it at 3/4? Is it at half? And it makes it really difficult to be consistent from one service to another service and keep things the same. And when you're working with cameras, consistency is really important, and repeatability is really important. So if you have a lighting controller that can sit on a desk near the point at where all the cameras are controlled, those can also be set up with scenes and presets, just like the PTZ cameras can be controlled with scenes and presets, which makes training so much easier. And rotating volunteers from one week to another, if you have just buttons that can be pushed for, this part of the service and that part of the service, so much easier than, having to control a dozen different fixtures by hand.
Bill asked a great question. He said, can you demonstrate on one of your remote controlled systems any of the types of rigs or par cans shown? And he gave an example there. I mentioned it before, first of all, yeah, all those lights that you saw in Alaska, those were cheap par cans that I was dimming. But our church is already rigged for Zoom. And as I mentioned before, we can put on a little demo of what different kinds and colors of light do when you're on the when you're playing with them. And maybe we can work that out for one of our upcoming episodes. Or at the very least, maybe I can go in and record. One of the challenges we have is, many of you have, is you're trying to do this during daylight hours when you're being flooded with external light, and who knows what that external light is. Is it a bright sunny day? Is there a storm going on outside and it's dark? Your ambient light changes dramatically, so what you do in the room can often change dramatically. I'll try and I think I'll try and record daylight example in the building, and then maybe a nighttime example, like we would do for the coffee house, and show what side lighting does, what putting a color wash behind you does, that kind of stuff. Or we get David, because he's from theater, and have him do it.
All the theaters are closed right now. If I could get into
right.
one, that would be great. But,
Yeah. So that want to bounce back to color, because I addressed white as being different colors, but we didn't really talk about, real colors, reds, blues, yellows, greens, to be used for effect. Now, last week during the after show, Mark told just an amazing story that I thought was just spot on in how and why we use lighting and colored lighting for effect. I don't know, Mark, if you want to, would you mind trying to relate that story again?
Sure. So as part of the coffee house, we booked Janice Ian to come in, and she was a little particular about her lighting. She demands that there be a bastard amber filter there and available. So before the show, as I do with a lot of artists, if I'm doing the lighting, I go and I meet them in the green room and say, hi, I'm your lighting guy for the show. And you could see her eyes roll back in her head. It was like, oh, good. I have a church lighting guy, just what I needed to talk to. And, she's been around the block. She's done much bigger shows than a 300-seat church. She said, so what is it you're looking for? And I said, well, we don't have much, but I can create moods. I can put you in a pool of light in the center of the stage. I can make the stage look huge by lighting up all of the trees outside the windows, make the stage look gigantic. I can give you all kinds of stuff. And I said, but let me explain what it is that I'm looking for from you. I said, my understanding of what a musician does is they feel an emotion. They decide they want to express that emotion through music. So they compose a piece of music that expresses that emotion. Then they turn around and perform that piece. And the charge they got out of being a performer is when they perform the piece that they composed, people feel that emotion that they felt that motivated them, and they enjoy doing that. And therefore the artist enjoys having brought that to them. And she said, well, that's exactly right. And she said, so what is it you want from me? And I said, well, through lights, I can predispose your audience to a particular mood. You don't have to fight fluorescent lights here to try and get and use only your voice and your guitar to get the point across. By creating a mood with the lighting, I can predispose them to that emotion, and then you can concentrate strictly on your music and get them the rest of the way. And she was like, oh, that's brilliant. And she said, so what do I have to do? And I said, I just need a single line or a phrase, anything for each of the pieces that you're going to do. Just tell me the mood you're trying to get across. I'll figure it out on the fly. I got 2 sheets full of, big stonkin' ballad, or, she just gave me moods and emotions that she was trying to do with each song. And from there, I just figured out, okay, this one, it needs to be tight and intimate. I'm going to give her a pool of light. I'm going to backlight her with a really dim blue or a purple or something like that. So that, and this song, the big stonkin' ballad, yeah, I'm going to fill the stage with light. And because we've got lights under the windows outside lighting up the birch trees past the windows outside, I lit up all those trees, and suddenly the stage was gigantic. You were at a folk festival. And it doesn't take a lot of light, but knowing the mood she was trying to get to helped me figure out ahead of time what colors to apply, and how big to make the image for people. End of story.
And she loved you for it. She loved you for it, right? She said so afterwards.
That's brilliant. I couldn't add anything more to that. I'm sure David could relate to that because, in stage lighting, as we said, that's exactly what they're doing.
Yep.
Conveying emotion.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I've had a lot of that. That sounds beautiful, Mark. That's a great way to put that. It's kind of nice when at concerts or shows or venues are working really well, when everyone is working on it, when all the when the technicians are artists too, and it can just work like that, right? Like you take the mood and then everyone translates it through their particular medium, and that's nice when that all can happen together.
Wow.
How does that relate to churches, Unitarian churches? For example, our candlelight Christmas Eve service. We very slowly dim the lights in the place, and the kids walk around. You light candles, and the candles spread through the whole place, and the whole room starts to glow from underneath rather than up above, while everyone sings Silent Night. And at the end of that, they blow out their candles, and as the candles are getting blown out, we very slowly bring up the house lights again. Move people in and out of that mood very slowly. And it's become a thing in our church. That's just what we do, and people look forward to it.
And even to emphasize maybe a more serious sermon.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's, different topics that are more serious than others that you might want to assist with that.
Oh, the possibilities.
All right. I think we're going to move on. At this point, we're going to, we're going to thank our panelists for such a wonderful conversation, and thank all of our guests for being here. Don't go away. We're not done yet. We're going to move into an after show where we'll enable everybody to unmute their microphones and we can have a casual conversation. But for those who don't want to stick around, I hope that you've enjoyed our time together. Perhaps you found it informative, enlightening, enriching, energizing, and motivating. Watch the Discord for our agendas coming up for next week's show. Next week's show is going to be a fabulous, power punch show. It is the second part of our series on copyright licensing. And we're going to have the intellectual property officer from Christian licensing, CCLI and CCS, going to be here. We're going to do an entire show around copyright licensing. So it's a very deep field, very complicated, very complex legal area where the basic premise is that if you're going to use a piece of music or a piece of art or a piece of video that somebody else created, you want to make sure that they get fairly compensated for their work. And that's basically what copyright licensing is, but there's a whole lot to it. So we're going to have an authoritative interview and presentation next week. So make sure to be here for that.
And bring your questions. And bring your questions ahead of time.
And bring your question. Oh, as a matter of fact,
on the Discord.
We have, there's an area in the Discord, there's a link there to write in advance your questions about copyright licensing. Thank you, JLo. Yeah, we want to collect as many advanced questions as possible. So if there's something that you've really been wondering about, something you haven't been able to find out, let us know. And so we can cover those during the presentation, and then we will have Q&A after as well. But we want to know in advance what people really want to hear. And if you have questions about any other topic, technical or non-technical, the Discord is there. We will engage with you. So participate in that. So dare to dream, think big. You know, one of the silver linings about the COVID pandemic is that it has proven that all of our churches, regardless of size, are capable of doing amazing things. You've put on some really, really cool virtual worship services. And I will bet that you never thought you would be able to do that before COVID, but you did. And now you have people coming from all over the world to view your services. And why not continue that? Think about it. Do it. It's possible. It's not real expensive, and the rewards can be really worth it. Expand your ministry to redefine who your community is. And so that's the challenge. That's the challenge. And we'll see you next week. Our service continues. Bye for now, but stick around.